Welcome to Skwat Talks, number 7. Tonight we're going to be talking about training planning versus just winging it in the weight room. So let me preface that by saying that this is not a judgment on the way anybody is training or spending their time in the gym. That if you are winging it, that's great. You should do whatever you want to do in the weight room. Choose your training plan or lack of plan based on what it is that you ultimately want to do and what you want to accomplish. So I am not judging anybody by what they do or don't do in the weight room. I'm just hopefully going to be giving you some thoughts on what it means to train your planning if you choose to do so. And hopefully if you have specific goals in the weight room, maybe some of these things that I mentioned will strike a chord with you and hopefully make it easier for you to create a training plan of your own and work towards achieving them. So the workout that I'm doing here tonight that you're watching is work up to some heavy singles, doubles, and triples with 275. I say heavy with quotes on it. I'm working up to some what I consider to be respectable weights in the squat again. So I've been doing a lot of really high rep stuff with 135 to 225 for many years now, and I haven't really gone much heavier than 225 in a very long time. So I'm trying to work my way back up to doing sets of 10 to 20 with 315 on the bar. I hope that by mid-2022 that I can be kind of back in that range again. I'm not 100% sure that that'll happen without gaining some weight, but I don't really want to gain weight at this time, so I'm going to try and stay at the same body weight and then hit 315 for 10 to 20 reps for maybe some repeat sets as well. That's the goal for 2022, and that's kind of what I'm working up to right now. And with that in mind, I am planning my training out a little bit more than I used to. There were a lot of times in my weight training career, my time in the gym, where I just kind of go in and hit what I felt like hitting, doing what I felt like doing, what I felt was good and what I felt like doing, instead of working towards specific goals. But right now I'm kind of working towards some specific goals. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you go to the weight room, you're going to see a lot of people doing a lot of different things. and some of those people have very specific goals in mind when they go to the weight room. So they're going to hit these numbers, they're going to do these exercises, they're going to do this many sets, this many reps with this much weight. On the other hand, you have a lot of people who just kind of go in and they pick and choose exercises as they see fit. And they might work an exercise until they're tired or bored of it and then move on to something else. And they might say, oh, today I feel like doing this exercise, and wow, that looks kind of fun, I'll give that a shot. Nothing wrong with that at all. And if you are someone who's a comparative noob in the weight room and you aren't particularly strong, and if you don't have any specific goals, then that might be exactly enough for you. It might be what you need. You might feel better, you might get stronger, and everybody's happy. On the other hand, if you have specific goals, and especially if you have goals that are a little bit more ambitious, it's going to behoove you to have specific goals and have a specific plan to help you achieve those goals. For example, if your goal is to squat 500 pounds, that's a specific goal, right? If your goal is to hit 500 in a squat by mid-year, that's a more specific goal that is time-bound, right? As opposed to having some kind of soft goal like feel better, get stronger, look better naked. So having specific goals, having SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound, having SMART goals is going to make it easier for you to develop a training plan with what we would call benchmarks along the way, so that you can see progress or see where maybe you're not making progress, and then make adjustments along the way. Those things are going to make it easier for you to attain those goals. If, on the other hand, you don't have specific goals, if you have very general training outcomes that you hope to accomplish, then maybe you don't need a specific plan. But if the more specific and the more ambitious your goals are, then again, we might need something more specific in the way of planning. So here's my suggestions to you. If you want to have a plan, as opposed to just kind of winging it in the weight room, then you should have very clear goals and purpose. I don't think every goal has to be a SMART goal, but it does make it easier. Once you've established some specific goals, you need to set up some benchmarks for the journey. For example, if my goal is a 500-pound squat, I need to set up some benchmarks along the way. So, for example, maybe 315 for 10, maybe 405 for 5. Those are benchmarks along the way that show me that I'm making progress towards my goal of squatting 500. I might also have a goal of, a benchmark of doing 5 sets of 20 in the glute ham raise. If I really believe that that exercise is key, then I should probably have that as a benchmark. So you set up the benchmarks to show you whether or not you're making progress towards your ultimate goal of 500 in the squat. So have clarity of purpose, have goals, have clear goals, SMART goals if possible, and then set up your benchmarks along the way. In your training, you should have redundancy as well. So what do I mean by redundancy? I mean that you have enough overlap in some of the training that if one component of your training doesn't go as well as you'd like, that you have covered for that in other areas of your training. So for example, if you squat, you should be getting a lot of hamstring development and work. However, we know that the hamstrings and the glutes are really important movers in the squat. Or if you're going to argue about the hamstrings being movers, then that's fine. But I think most of us would agree that the hamstrings are important for squats. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to make sure that the hamstrings are being developed and worked. Maybe not just by squatting, but also by glute ham raise, maybe by deadlifts, maybe by good mornings. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing is redundant, that you are covering those bases that you need to. What else would be important in a 500-pound squat? Upper back strength. And maybe just doing heavy squats is not enough to develop the upper back strength to hold the bar in a secure position as you squat your 500. So what do you need to do? What needs to be redundant? Upper back training. So are you doing the lat work? Are you doing pulls? Are you doing pull-ups? Are you doing rows? Are you doing bent over laterals? What kind of upper back work are you doing? Hopefully you have redundancy in your training to cover those things. I'm not a huge fan of minimalism when it comes to achieving goals. There is certainly that idea of minimum effective dose that's really important in understanding it and not going overboard. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people tend to really pare down their training so much that they lose that redundancy in their training. And as a result, I see a lot of people maybe not making the progress that they want. So be careful. Minimalism is important. Minimum effective dose is certainly something you should consider when it comes to training, but just don't get caught in the trap of always doing the bare minimum, because I think it runs the risk of you just not meeting the goals that you want. The redundancy is also, and the benchmarks also, are to help you adjust when things go off course. So if you notice, for example, that you're tipping over as you rise out of the hole, I don't know if that's a tightness thing or if that's engagement of the glutes thing, what that is, but you need to find a way to adjust when things go off course, and having those benchmarks is going to help you do that. Your training should also follow principles of training. There are 3 major principles of training that I would address. Some are rules of thumb. I think there's probably some disagreement about what exactly are principles of training, but the ones that I'm about to talk about are things I think most people would agree with. And the first principle is the principle of specificity. Specific adaptations to impose demands. If you want to be good at squatting, if you want to squat 500 pounds, it goes without saying you got to squat a lot. That you got to squat heavy. Squatting 135, that's not specific enough. We have to be squatting somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 if the goal is eventually to squat 500. Specific adaptations to impose demands. A word about specialization and specificity. You need to be careful about it. If you are overly specific in your training, you run the risk of burnout, you run the risk of overuse injuries. There is something to be said for a little bit more generalized approach to things. Again, if you're overly specific, you're going to run the risk of overuse injuries. So be careful about that. On the other hand, you don't want to be too general. There's a lot of people who kind of fall into the camp of, well, we're going to work the crap out of your GPP, and we're just going to get you generally strong, and that's going to be enough to make all of your goals. Well, maybe, but maybe not. If your goal is to squat 500, again, you're going to have to squat a lot, and doing Fran is probably not going to be specific enough. So specific adaptations to impose demands. Be specific in your training. Also, overload, the principle of overload and progression. You probably need some kind of map of your training volume and intensities, and be looking at those things as you go. Density is another thing to kind of be paying attention to. Frequency of training. So as we look at intensity, volume, frequency, and density, are you making progress? Sometimes that's not a clear upward curve. It may wave, but be careful of that. You want to make sure that you are making progress and that you are following that principle of overload. If you're not adding poundage to the bar on a fairly regular basis, and if your goal is a 500-pound squat, you may not get there. So adding weight, that's important. And then the last training principle that I would mention is recovery. You want to make sure that you are recovering between your workouts. Not always fully recovered necessarily, but recovery needs to be dealt with in some fashion. It's not enough to just say, well, I'm just going to get in better shape as I go without any kind of real plan for rest. So make sure that either through training frequency or as you waive the volume and the intensity, that you are getting enough recovery. That's really important. So again, specificity, overload, and recovery as your principles of training. You want to make sure that you have clear goals and purpose and benchmarks along the way to help you gauge progress or lack thereof. All right. I hope that's helpful for you. I hope that helps you plan out your training. And let me know if you have questions. If you want to talk more about it, let me know. Hit me up in the messages, and I will see you next time on Skwat Talks.